Hello there, you are very welcome along to the RTÉ Rugby podcast, our last rugby podcast of 2024. We didn't give you one last week before Christmas, so we said we'd come out a little bit early this week, a Monday pod rather than a Wednesday one this week, although this time of year, who's honestly keeping track of the days? Bernard, Jackman and Johnny Murphy are with me to look back on the two rounds of Interpros. Bernard, did you have a nice Christmas?
Yeah, lovely Christmas and two Interpros to talk about. Yeah, two interesting games for sure. I'm looking forward to dissecting them with you.
Which games did you get to? The Aviva and Thomond Park, was it?
Yeah, yeah. No, sorry, Viva Home Park. Yeah, exactly. I didn't
Aviva
get to
Thomond Park. Johnny, you have a house full of young kids, so you probably had the busiest Christmas out of the lot of us, I would say.
Yeah, we had a great Christmas. But like yourself, I'm not sure what day it is where we are. But yeah, look, we've been kept busy in terms of school. So the school lads were in this morning and in over the last couple of kind of 10 days. Yeah, it was just the biggest issue in our house trying to keep track of the days. But yeah, it was great fun, and what it's all about.
Well, listen, you're doing well to get a room to yourself in the house on a Monday morning during Christmas to do this podcast. Fair play to you. We'll start, lads, with the most recent game because it was probably the most significant result of the last 10 days, and that was Ulster 17, Connacht 7 at Dexcom Stadium on Saturday evening. Bernard, Richie Murphy after the match, he said it wasn't the best performance he's had from his team since he took charge. He said there's a lot more in them. But in the context of this season, their recent results, the injury list they have, and the strength of the team that Connacht put out on paper, is this Richie's best result rather than best performance since he took charge midway through last season?
Yeah, I think result and I think the performance will come. I mean, to go down there with the amount of injuries he had on the back of five losses, the amount of academy players making their debuts, first squads, etc. A bit of disruption pre-match as well. Obviously, in the warm-up, they lost a couple of bodies and had to make a couple of changes, and I think it was exceptional. Really, the grit they showed, the defensive plan they put in place. Using Doak as a shooter, but just the aggression that they brought, and they don't need to have a big attacking game at the moment when you've guys like Izuchuku and McNabney, who can get you gain line. And Wilson as well is very good in the loose. So huge for him, massive. I mean, the turn into 2025 now on the back of obviously the heavy defeat to Toulouse and Bordeaux and losing to Munster. It just gives them a totally different outlook, and also shows that there's some youngsters there, like Carson and Telfer, etc., who and Jack Murphy himself as well, who have a big future.
Johnny, like it's probably a good the way they approached that game on Saturday evening is probably a good example of just like fairly smart coaching where you've a very limited team in terms of experience and important players out injured, and there wasn't anything flashy or extravagant about the way they went about it. It was just defend really hard, carry really hard, get gain line success, and execute a simple enough game plan properly.
Yeah, and I think the basis of the kind of shows the mentality and how they're very much in, they're in unison together. They really believe on the path that they're on because, sometimes, defensive systems are based on mentality and what player inside and outside is going to do and being able to cover their inside or outside shoulders, whatever way you're defending. But they really went after that and they showed that it was interesting, Doak in his interview after kind of referenced that and the belief that they have, and then it was just full buy-in across the board, and guys like Telfer and those guys really stood up, very smart in terms of their defensive setup, in terms of where Murphy was in the channels a couple of times. Then in green zone, he was being switched out to the 13 channel, which was very hard. Player teams aren't necessarily going to go in that channel in inside the 22. So yeah, it was a really smart plan, well executed, and full buy-in, and I think that's a testament to the coaching staff, given the run of results that they've been on, to really come down and execute that plan with full buy-in from not just the 23, but with the disruptions to everything laid on. It was really good to see from an Ulster perspective, and gives them a bit of bounce into the new year.
Yeah, and like particularly coming in burning off the back of the Munster defeat, where they they really, really should have won that game. And it just seemed like every time Munster actually got half an opportunity, they completely carved them up. For them to turn that around and put in the defensive performance they did the other night in particular, considering as well it's Christmas week and the schedule's a little
Yeah.
bit jumpy, and you know you're not getting the same run of training that you probably normally would have. It was very impressive how they just reorganized themselves.
Yeah, and I think like obviously the likes of Treadwell and Timoney in particular really stood up and led the way, and I think regardless of what else Ulster have in their locker in terms of talent, I think Richie will keep looking back at this game over the course of his tenure and talk about and remember the character and resilience they showed. You know, backs to the wall. They were massive underdogs. It was hard to really see, you know, how they would win the game. And because Connacht's attack has been, you know, one of the better parts of their game, and Ulster defense, to be fair, hasn't been amazing.
Mm.
But they found 80-minute defensive performance, which you haven't seen for a while, and frustrated Connacht over and over again, and would have got massive belief from that. Like that's a huge win for them, and for those youngsters now. You know, they've won in an Ulster jersey, they've won an inter-pro game away from home, and they'll feel so much better about themselves, and I think it's a huge boost to the Richie Murphy tenure up there. This result will mean a huge amount, and could be the difference between making top eight and not later on in the year.
100%. And like, we're being full of praise for them at the moment, but obviously, there are still going to be some tough days ahead for this team
Yeah.
because it's a young group of players, and you only have to look at the back line that finished the match on Saturday evening. I'm taking this from a fellow called Ross Barnett on Twitter, who or X, who posted it on Saturday evening, and it just sums it up excellently. Like the the back line, Johnny, that finished the game for Ulster on Saturday evening. Nathan Doak, 23 years old, Jack Murphy, 20 years old, Rory Telford, 21, Jude Postlewaite, 22, Ben Carson, 22, Willem de Klerk, 20 on debut, and old man Michael Lowry then at the ripe old age of 26 years of age. Like for them to see the job out is a very, very impressive thing. Even though there are going to be more difficult days ahead, this isn't going to be a result that completely flips around the season and makes them title challengers or anything. But it stops a rot and it puts them back on track, and it gives a lot of belief into some younger players.
Oh, it's massive. Like it's huge. And we all remember days like that in your career where your backs are against the wall and as young guys you step up. But like what that does for the whole environment is incredible. And like the average age of that back line, it's brilliant. And there's guys like Telford that have been playing really well in terms of AIL. And that, it's just great for um for everyone involved. And like I think how they closed the game out with, they were really smart in that. Like even, Murphy's break towards the end of the game and his little kick down, just, some people might try to finish that or look for an offload or whatever, but it was the right thing to do and just build that pressure with 60 seconds, 90 seconds ago, and that stops, any chance Connacht had of getting a bonus point. It was really, they showed composure beyond their years, and it was just really, really well done. And that talent will grow, and that belief will double those, double the size of those guys in terms of being able to do that and away from home in an interpro where they weren't given a chance. You can't underestimate how what that's going to stand to them, and will just solidify the whole group.
I might talk about Jack Murphy for a second, actually, Bernard, because like for a 20-year-old, like there was a significant amount of pressure on him the other night
Mm.
for a lot of reasons. It was his second appearance, his first start for Ulster. His dad is the coach. His older brother is playing for the opposition. It's a big Interpro on TV coming up to Christmas. The team is in a poor run of form. It was a big one for him. And it's funny, like it doesn't seem like he's getting any special favors from his old man up at Ulster, because on the Friday before Christmas, I was up there in Belfast, and I remember after the match, Richie was asked about how he thought Jack got on, and the first thing he said was, "I was disappointed he kicked the ball out at half time. I thought he should have gone for a drop goal." So
Yeah.
He's not giving him any special treatment up there. It's for certain.
No, but he's actually a brilliant drop goaler. He can slot them from 50 yards with either feet. Like an amazing, amazingly talented kid. He's obviously in Presbray. He the only area that he's behind a little bit is obviously in physical stature. You know, he's quite slight, and I thought it was smart the way Ulster protected him and hit him as much as they could. But he's got loads of pace, and we saw that him sprinting down the wing. He's got a very good passing game. He's got a good temperament as well. Like, he understands the game, and I mean, that's only going to improve now with the amount of time he's going to spend in the car with Richie. You know, going back over games and getting Richie's feel for it. So Richie understands the game really well. Like, I think Richie definitely will look to attack more with Ulster, but I suppose you want to attack more with solid foundations and getting a settled backline, and they haven't been able to do that with injuries. So it's smart how they've changed it up, and very pragmatic in how they want to play. But he is talented. I mean, at schoolboy level, obviously he wouldn't be as well known really in Leinster because unfortunately Prez didn't have big cup runs. They ran into his 6th year ran into Blackrock in round one. But I've seen Jack do things that a lot of other kids can't do. So he's definitely someone to keep an eye on. And to be honest, when you look at Morgan, hasn't really stamped his authority on it up there. There may be a real opportunity for him to get the significant amount of game time this year, which would be great for him.
Yeah, I think we'll see a lot more of him. Couple of other young players then as well, obviously in the forwards, and it felt like it was a game where the forwards probably did win in the match. And I know we spoke about like Nick Timoney and Kieran Treadwell, the more experienced fellas, leading by example, Birch, but like James McNabney over those, like he's got a few games this season as well, but I think in particular over these 2 matches I've seen him at Christmas has been exceptional. And throw Scott Wilson into the mix there as well. Someone who you mentioned him obviously like is great in the loose. Probably still needs to shore up the scrum a little bit, but is just like a brilliant raw talent.
Yeah, and that's what that's the different. That's what wins you games. That's why people talk about Leinster. You know, they have really good athletes. And Ulster now are starting to show a few of them who are at the right age. You know, Timoney obviously is, and Treadwell are a bit older, but Wilson, Izuchuku, and McNabney, they will give you go forward. You add Augustus in next year, the 8th of sign from Northampton. He's an explosive ball carrier. You get McCluskey back at 12, getting you gain line, and it's a different profile of team. You know, certainly a more explosive profile than Connacht or Munster look like they have, you know, in their squad profile at the moment. So it's, as you said, it's early days for Richie. There will be dark days ahead. You know, they don't have the depth, but certainly they'll be feeling a lot better about themselves. And that Ulster Academy, which we're kind of is much maligned, you know, can start to puff their chest out a bit and go, look, we have some talent here who could be big name players for Ulster and some of them for Ireland. I mean, McNabney's physical ability and how he moves, like quite rare. It's quite rare to have someone as explosive as him coming through the system.
And he is, Johnny, like he's just another one of those players that from that exceptional under-20s team from a couple of years ago that we're starting to see a little bit more of again. And it feels like it's one of those under-20s teams that like there's a good chunk of that group now that are actually getting significant game time a little bit earlier than under-20s groups would have in the past.
Yeah, and I think that you know that's the sign of kind of their physical maturity, but also their mental maturity in terms of being able to take the opportunities when they give them, and then when they're given that opportunity, they're turning it into, you know, a run of games, or, you know, maybe even playing 15 to 20 games a year, which can crown a player in that kind of 21, 22, 23 age bracket, and the experience they harness from that, both the good days and the bad days. So yeah, and like, look, you throughout, you've mentioned it, some, you know, Irish 20s teams, they stand the test of time and they make a mark on provinces and Irish teams going forward, and they certainly look like a group that is going to do that going forward.
Moving on to Connacht then. Bernard. Hard to know where to begin, really, because it's something that Pete Wilkins has actually spoken about earlier on this season as well, about how um, they put in that good performance on the opening day against Munster. And I remember one thing he said at the time, leading into the following week against the Sharks, was that they had a habit in previous years of putting in a real spirited performance for a big Interpro, and even if they didn't quite get the result, they would struggle to match it up the following week. Now they did it earlier on this season where they pulled off that big comeback against the Sharks, but this was like watching the Connacht of maybe a year or two ago, where they just couldn't really find that same pitch 2 weeks in a row. Like it was largely the same team that took to the field against Leinster at the Aviva Stadium a week previous, but they just looked a shadow of the team that ran Leinster all the way.
Yeah, and this is kind of the perception that's kind of out there in amongst the pro players in Ireland, the non-Connacht pro players in Munster, Leinster, and Ulster, is that that's Connacht. They'll get up for a game against Leinster or an Interpro, and then not pick up points against the Dragons or Cardiff or Edinburgh. They won't be the same. And unfortunately for them here is that they've flopped against an Irish province who on paper they should have been beating. Because Ulster had no real kind of form. The form, like the first Ulster's performance with a man down against Munster was actually was quite good, but they didn't get a win out of it. Whereas Connacht had obviously had a couple of soft wins in Europe, had played very well in the Viva. I thought the whole Mac Hansen outburst would galvanise them. They'd want to go out and show, regardless of referee, that they have the talent and the work ethic to win a home Interpro game in front of their own fans, and they just didn't show up. It was really bizarre. It was bizarre. They were tepid. It was like they thought they just sort of rock up and win. You know what I mean? And that's never the case in Interpro, and it's less the case in any URC game at the moment because it's so competitive. So it'll be a horrible. I think they're off. I think they'll probably be off till Wednesday or Thursday, like most of the other provinces. And it'll be a long few days soon on that, and not being able to deal with it, because that result, could have massive ramifications for them. And I think the 0-5 in the pros this year, and then I know they're up against good teams better resourced, but still, given that Ulster had so many injuries, that was a game Connacht really had to win, and it'll be interesting how they bounce back from this.
Johnny, you give a breakdown there on like what Ulster did really well in defence on Saturday evening to hamper Connacht, but like we've seen Connacht have ripped quite a few teams apart, like caused Leinster real problems in both games they've played this season. I know they only scored 12 points in each, but did actually really stretch them at various times. Why were they so sluggish and so slow to get going in attack? Is it a simple case that like they were losing collisions and obviously kind of couldn't really get anything off the back of that, or was there something in their attacking shape that just wasn't quite clicking?
Well, they did create lots of opportunities. They got one-on-ones on the edge, but it seemed like there was an issue, particularly on the edges. In terms of a couple of times, Cordero and guys, and they end up going into touch, and that's a bit of a sickener when you do that. You do get go forward and you lose that momentum. You look at their last play, that opportunity in the end that gets them a bonus point, and they force that offload. For me, it came down to their 22 and their green zone attack and their ability to execute in that space. Like when the pressure came on, they couldn't execute. Ford kicks the ball dead, and then that takes a bit of edge off his line kicks, and he's not making as much as he should. Then it was when the pressure really came on and they had to execute, they didn't. And it was like, Bert's already said, it was like they felt, they felt that they had to, just turn up. But maybe could have been the other way, where they felt the pressure, where they were favourites at home to win an Interpro, and they didn't necessarily deal with that, and they were, overly emotional connected to that, and then that led to, they were drained then in the first half, and they lose collisions, they're going backwards, and then it's very hard to build an attacking game when you don't get go forward because the defense is always going forward. But I think for me, the last play of the game where they do really well, it's really good play. They get that 2v1 down the edge, and then the ball goes into touch. That kind of summed up their whole performance in 40 or 50 seconds, where it's really good attack, but then that killer instinct in the 22, scrum turnovers, you had maul turnover with 5, 6, 7 minutes to go where they still had an opportunity to win. They just didn't execute when the real pressure was on. And that's credit also to Ulster where they were at, but it was just poor by Connacht, across the board, and particularly in that 22 attack.
Yeah, it certainly was. And you're at a stage now, Birch, with Connacht where it's midway through the regular season, 3 wins, 6 defeats. And it's never good to be at this situation with a team where you're already looking ahead at the remaining fixtures and trying to pick off what are the most winnable games here and where can they start to pick up points. They still have to go to South Africa. I know, as you mentioned, they've we kind of said, are they 5 interpros through already? So that's all they have is Munster at home left, which is going to be that big day in Mayo, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. But you are already starting to map out which are the real must-win games on the calendar.
Yeah, 100%. And obviously Ulster and Munster have gone to South Africa. Leinster and Connacht still have to go, as you said. And yeah, at the moment you'd be worried. I think they really missed Ione. They were very one-dimensional with Bundy having to carry a lot, and he carried really well, but that's not really Connacht's game. And once Ulster were able to not give up a line break, they lost a couple of gain lines against Bundy, but once they were able to not give up a line break, they actually were able to manage that situation, that next phase, pretty well, and Connacht just looked so lateral. And none of the forwards,
the forwards were outplayed.
Yeah, outplayed completely.
Except in the scrum, they largely dominated until that last one near the end. But collisions, breakdown, it was Ulster's day.
It was Ulster's day, and their lineout was poor. Jansen gave them a bit of go forward, but realistically, for Prendergast, Hurley Langton, and Boyle in particular, they just didn't have an influence on the game, and it was kind of a game where the way it was being played, it was going to come down to a collective back row or a back row to grab away the scruff of the neck. So definitely Timoney deserved to be man of the match, but they were Connacht were outplayed as a unit as well, and we're scratching our heads now and trying to find a solution to it. But they've been there quite a bit, and obviously I think Mac will probably get suspended. He'll miss a couple of games, whether they're the Challenge Cup games or URC games. I'm not sure how that works, but it's a tricky period for him now. A tricky period for him, and it's going to take a lot of I suppose brainwashing and recreating that self-belief in the squad from the coaching staff.
The only thing is the table is so tight that you can jump from where they are 13th up to 9th or 10th based on who you're playing and how other results go. So if they do manage to get maybe 2 in a row or beat the right, their games, if they're targeting them, they do jump up into that. They can jump up into that, top 8, and that is something that, because how tight it is, it does give them an opportunity if they do manage to string a couple of good performances together, which they can do. But that's the kind of, I suppose, the silver lining there, that they're not out of it yet. It's just they have to try and get on that run or put 2 back-to-back performances, as Bert has already said, that people are talking about that they're not doing at the moment.
To finish on Connacht, the one positive from the last week or 10 days, they did confirm last Monday the 23rd they are going to be able to bring that game against Munster on March 29th up to McHale Park in Castlebar, which is it is a big thing for them, Birch. It's going to be good to get a bigger crowd, obviously. because they've been fairly limited to about 4,000 at Dexcom Stadium this year with the redevelopment, but also just an opportunity to kind of spread the nest a little bit wider into the province. And you'd probably say there is there's a decent level of rugby there in Mayo. Like, I mean, you're talking about Dave Heffernan and Caelan Doris, the Ireland captain, coming out of there. Someone like Ballina in the AIL, but there's an untapped part of that county. It's a big county with a decent population that probably Connacht really need to start tapping into a little bit more, you'd say.
Yeah, no, massively. I think it's brilliant. Fair play to the GA for facilitating it, and the people who managed to get it over the line. Like, I was chatting to GA people from Donegal, and they said they'll go down to it. Do you know what I mean? To get to Ravenhill for them is a bit of a nightmare. And they'd love to go see a rugby match. You know what I mean? I think they'll get a lot of people into that ground who traditionally don't watch rugby live. And obviously the challenge then is to give them something that they want to go and travel to Galway, or at least some of the time come to see some home games in the new Dexcom when it's finished. And that's the challenge as well. And that's why a poor season this season would be even more difficult for them when you're trying to sell partner sponsorship packages and extra season ticket holders, etc., for the new stadium. So this is a big opportunity, but the most important thing is that the team, go out and play against Munster and not finish 6 from 6 in a negative. And yeah, it's a few months away, but certainly that's the big game for me now on their horizon, is to make sure that they're in top shape for that.
Yeah, and even Johnny, like the fact that it's only just under 2 weeks on from the end of the Six Nations as well. Like, I mean, if Ireland get a good Six Nations campaign there might be a little feel good factor. You get a few more neutrals out there to support it.
Yeah, it's great. Like, it's brilliant. And, it's going to be a good revenue driver for them, all that. There's so many opportunities for them. And this is the first time. Hopefully they can do it for, a couple of more times as well. So if they manage to, in future, maybe, Heineken Cup games or bigger or different interpros, and spread it around. So it's done once, and hopefully they can, people will talk about Leinster and filling the Aviva, but there are opportunities for the other provinces to go to bigger stadiums around, and in conjunction doing it well with the GAA. And look, it's great to see, and it'd be brilliant for them to really put in a performance that day.
Moving on then, Bernard, Munster 7, Leinster 28. Your Sunday Indo column yesterday, the headline, "The Great Divide Between Leinster and the Rest is Not Good for Irish Rugby." Give us the cliff notes for those who haven't read it.
Yeah, well, to be honest, the headline doesn't really reflect the article. The article was more about. The article was more.
I've used that excuse before.
No, I know, but I've read it. I read it. I've checked it again. No, I do mention it in there, but the article was actually about Leinster's significant shift in their mindset and how they want to play. And it's fascinating to watch a team, and some of this is marketing, but like the Leinster way, but it has been pretty much since professionalism that the majority of Leinster sides, were set up with a real positive attitude to attacking rugby. Now, depends on where you come from. There could be there's lots of people who don't think that attacking rugby is the be all and end all, and that what Leinster are doing is beautiful in its own way. But it's just been fascinating. I mean, how the game model they have, the way they've bought into it, and I think the Nienaber effect is phenomenal. I mean, he's like, often when we talk about South Africa and the physicality that they bring, we say, "Oh, sure, it's natural." I mean, it's the way they're brought up. You have the mixture of the Africans, the Europeans, the colours and the blacks, and they come together. And rugby at underage level, there is the premiums on physicality. They're big, powerful men, and of course you're going to play like that. But he's turned South County Dublin, players into like proper psychos. Like, there's an edge to nearly every one of them, and it's not just a couple of players in the forward pack, James Ryan going around the place bashing people. He's doing that, but nearly every single one of them, and even players off the bench, and whether they're they've got single digits on their jersey or double digits, they are looking to win those physical battles over and over again. And there seems to be a love of doing it. Like it's a massive change. It's got better week on week. And I think obviously Leinster have had to chop and change quite a bit, but we saw a strong Leinster team go to Limerick. And they relish the task. And Munster, in fairness, Munster threw everything they had at them. I have no criticism of Munster. I thought Munster left it all out there.
I thought it was actually like for a 28-7 game. I thought it was actually a pretty enjoyable game all around.
Yeah, so it wasn't a 50-0 or whatever, and I think that's the result. I don't, and actually probably it marked me more in terms of how I reflect on it. The fact that Munster actually threw pretty much everything they had, and yet you felt at the end they were just out of juice. You felt at the end Leinster were more dominant and more comfortable than the scoreline reflects, and that's probably the way Leinster wanted to look. It's kind of like the snake, the boa constrictor, where they just wrap themselves around you and suffocate you or choke you. And their game management, but also their ability to stay within that system and look for field position and then convert that red zone entries into scores. And Munster had loads of red zone entries, and you will get that against Leinster at the moment because their discipline is quite poor. But I think they know that, and they're not really worried about it because teams aren't punishing them. And I'd be interested if La Rochelle, if they get penalties under 40, obviously they have a bigger pack, so they potentially could go to the corner and score. But if they start taking 3 points, no one's really done that against them in the URC so far. No one's done that really.
Teams are doing it against Ireland.
Yeah, doing it against Ireland because Ireland's discipline has kind of dropped off a little bit, and some of that's probably down to how Leinster players are playing for Leinster, where it doesn't seem to be a no-no to give away penalties at a breakdown, to give away offside penalties, etc. They back themselves to be able to get themselves out of that situation, and the ones they don't get blown for will be big wins for them. So it's amazing. Like even the Jack Boyle playing 20 minutes, you can argue the toss on it, but it's something different, and something Leinster have never done before. So you'd have to say it's probably Jacques, his influence and having Porter on at the end of the game, but also still getting 60 minutes into him. Jack starting and I'd say there's an element of, and I'm only guessing here, is that once you do that a couple of times, if someone ends up having to get Shepherd hooked after 20, you can it's a bit more easy to fathom. It's never going to be easy to fathom, but obviously they've done it with Libbok. The team is bigger than the individual, and Jack obviously got the start, and actually, him and Rabba and Keller looked strong when he was on. So it is good experience for him. And he was up against a fresh Munster front row rather than a tiring Munster front row. But there's a lot. The way Leinster have shifted is it's amazing to watch. But it's the buy-in that they've got on it. And look, at maybe not win the trophy makes that easier. The players are more receptive, but I think the Nienaber effect has been massive and much more this year than last year. Obviously, when now he's had a full preseason.
Yeah, I think the big thing on that, Perch, is that it's the buy-in on the discipline that not the buy-in on the discipline, but the acceptance of them being on the line all the time, as in on that line that they push it to the absolute final millimeter, not even centimeter, that if they do give away a penalty, it's like, well, that's great. We're on the line. We're going to live on the line. And they're clearly not that worried about it because they just back their D. It's like, there is space to attack, but be a kick space or getting to the edge, or if the ball goes around them, they don't care because they're like, well, take it, execute it. And then if you are on the edge and they've made gain line, their mentality is actually not to, like most teams on a line break or when they get into the edge, is, okay, we'll consolidate here, get together for a phase or two, and then we'll go hard again. Their mentality just seems to be, no, we double down again and we go even harder when we're under even more pressure. So it's like the whole pressure and diamond thing, that they're just like, no, we just keep going. And they believe in that. They believe in their system so well. They're like, fine, get to an edge, take it, kick it there. Don't care, we'll stop it. And if a ball is thrown into touch or they don't execute on the edge, some teams will be like, oh, we'll go again there. And Leinster are like, but sure, throw the ball into touch, we'll take it back. Or knock it on the edge. Grand, fine, take it. We're giving you that space. Try and get there. It's brilliant. It's brilliant to watch, and I just love that pure mentality shift of fine, we're just on the line and we're going to stay on the line, and who cares? Whatever, if it give away penalty ground, we'll stop you at line out time, or we'll stop you at maul time. We'll stop you in the 5 meter. It really is just it's class to watch.
Just Neil, it's easier at the moment as well because I know the Bristol game was very messy, but the scrum was dominant. They had scrum dominance, and then you're going to have more knock-ons with this pressurized defense. So the opposition are making more errors because of less time. Then you get a scrum, and then you can win a penalty, and then you kick it into the corner, and you have the power game then to score like this. The Prendergast try looked really soft, and Leinster only had 14 against 15. But realistically, when I look back on it, obviously they could defend it better, but they were just under so much pressure to stop those pick and goes, that they naturally got tighter than they should have. And their immediate priority was to stop the pick and goes and hope Leinster don't play away from there. But obviously Leinster did, and they concede, and that was a massive blow to them to concede when Leinster had a man in the bin, when Tommy Ryan was in the bin. But again, will they have a dominant set piece against Toulouse? Probably not. So
yeah, like, do you mind me asking, how stable a foundation do you think that is? Because if I was to give my opinion, I think in the last two games, while they got quite a few scrum penalties across these last two games, I think they were lucky to get a handful of those. And I think on another day, the referee's arm has gone up in a different direction.
Yeah, I think Rabba actually is actually scrummaging very well. He's settled down a bit. He's not cutting in as much as he was, and he's given a really nice low base to the right hand side, and he's been quite patient. So there was times there where he just waited, and then he started to go forward. The challenge they have is their loose heads are very messy. More so than him. He's a tricky scrummager, but I think he's actually adapted reasonably well to the URC over the last few weeks. But it's the other side where I think it's 50-50s, and they've been getting them more often than not, Neil. So that's the challenge. Also, is the problem is I see it. Sorry, the potential risk for Leinster is that the URC at the moment, you can be a really messy team on the defensive side of the ruck, and that's not just the Irish games. I mean. Edinburgh, Glasgow was 3-0 after 45 minutes. Or and then the English Premiership. I watched the Bristol Bears against Sale Sharks game. Sale Sharks won 38-0, which is an amazing result because Bristol have been absolutely flying, bar the Leinster game. And Brian McGuigan, the Bristol or Sale Sharks defense coach, was talking afterwards, and he talked about the teaming and cage the bear was the mindset, and we're going to have to go after the defensive breakdown. And I looked at the defensive breakdowns, and they were way cleaner and way less disruptive than anything you'd see in the URC. Because in England, the referees are really intolerant of the defensive side. So there's cleaner ball on offer, and you can still attack. Whereas in the URC this year in particular, and it's the same rules, same laws in both competitions, but just they have a real bugbear about the defensive players being negative. In the URC, you're allowed to be negative. At the moment, that's the way the referees seem to be doing it, and it's rewarding teams like Leinster who are really explosive, who are really messy. And Connacht did the same thing to Leinster. All the Irish provinces are capable of doing it, but the problem is then when you go to Europe and you get a French ref or an English ref, will you get blown off the park? And, will that be the deciding factor? So it's just something that they'll be very wary of. At the moment, the URC, you get rewarded for being very disruptive at the defensive breakdown. And it's making the game not very pleasing on the eye, I think. Unless you love collisions and love the kick game and all that stuff, or set piece. It's quite hard to play free-flowing rugby.
Yeah, and it's funny actually, when the referees are letting it flow like that, Johnny, particularly around the breakdown, they kind of end up making a rod for their own back in a way, because I think whichever team loses, they can probably go back and pick out 15 rucks throughout the match where there was probably a penalty that was left go. Now, there was probably 15 rucks on their side as well where, they had a penalty that, they should have been penalised that wasn't given, but it probably does end up meaning there's more scrutiny on the referees because of it.
Yeah, and I think the ones that you feel sorry for are the ones where the referee is saying is when they do kind of counter ruck in that barred position, they have a really good hit, but then the hit from the attacking team is fair, but then their hips swing around and they end up facing their defensive team, their
Yeah.
own team, and they're kind of half kicking the ball and not. But it's just a momentum thing. It's not necessarily a tactic, but it is a bit of a tactic, obviously. But they're the ones that create. And then you have another guy coming in from the side from an attack perspective to clean him out. They've lost an extra body on there from an attacking perspective, which then tightens them up, and then they can bring more line speed. That's what Leinster are really, really good at. But it can be hard. And I think that for the referees, if they let one go, then they have to let both sides go. And that's where the messiness comes from. And the consistency around that. Like the one obviously in the Munster game that's for Munster that is kind of play on and James Ryan for their third try. It's their third try where the game is still in the melting pot. And then James Ryan's popped like that should be a penalty against James Ryan, but it's
he's holding the ball for about 7 seconds there off the ground.
But like that's really good play by Munster, but they're not getting the reward there, and it's like that's kind of the nature of the beast, unfortunately, at the moment in terms of the ruck situation. But that should be pulled up by the TMO. Like it's very clear for everyone to see. But like that's kind of the nature of the beast in the URC at the moment. But the ruck is messy, but it's for someone like probably for Birch and I, it's really interesting to watch. But then the casual fan who sat down with a beer at home or in a pub to go watch it, the last Interpros, and was at a party on my uncle's 80th, and they were like kind of saying, "Oh, well, the standard wasn't great over the last couple of nights, was it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, they're probably right as the casual fan or the fan, but technically." For me watching, I'm like, it's actually really cool to watch because you're seeing all these little things going on, and so there is a bit of to or fro in that from a spectacle perspective.
Just on that though, on the James Ryan pop, like that can't happen. Like that's in the end it doesn't affect the result, but like a try that comes so quickly after a penalty in my view. I mean, Munster counter ruck that, like they were in the defensive ruck. The James should have released the ball. You can't pass the ball from the ground that long after. Is my take on it. That should have been a penalty to Munster. And I was asking the ref, and I think at the end Munster got very frustrated refereeing. But I agree with you, Johnny, 100%. The team will be able to send it, and it won't be right. But the big moment like that, the big moment like the Geordie Barrett clean out on Bundy, they need to be looked at. I think that's where referees are really putting themselves under pressure, and not working as well as a team as they need to, because that does frustrate fans and players and coaches, because it's a pretty clear cut one. Really, that one's clear cut. It's not like a forward pass that's marginally forward. That's something we don't really see very often. I don't see it because it's a penalty.
Yeah, I'd have more criticism with those two incidents. I'd have more criticism with the TMO that didn't just say to the referee, "Go back, you need to look at something here." Because I think when the referee's in the moment, every time the ball goes out of play, a captain is speaking to the referee of, "Can you look at this? Can you look at this? Can you look at this?" And I think the referee needs to have a bit of scope there, where he needs to kind of lay down the law a little bit and say, "Do you know what? I can't keep listening to you every time the ball goes out of play." But for something like that, James Ryan pass off the ground, for something like the Geordie Barrett and Bundy Aki thing, as soon as that replay comes up on the screen, the TMO who's sitting there realistically should just be saying to the referee, "Go back and have a look at this."
Yeah, and I think the issue with that is, and the frustration from players and coaches around this is, rugby is so orientated on momentum. So that is a massive momentum swing there in terms of the energy that Thomond Park can get for home advantage. It's in the 22. They've had a massive D shift. That penalty there gets the whole crowd behind them. They exit. The game is still in the melting pot. It's 14-7. It's massive. Like, and that's the big thing. The Barrett one for me is a real difficult one because he's done everything right technically in terms of his body positioning. It's his height. Does he have to be lower? But it is direct head contact, so it's a really hard one. That would, but it should definitely have been looked at. Like, but when you actually slow down and you look at it, his angle into contact is okay. Like, it's fine. His height is good, but he's not aware of where Bundy's head is. So that one is probably a difficult one conversation to have. But the one in Thomond Park is madness that it's not picked up, you know?
Yeah. I think in general there seems to be too much onus on a referee needing to ask for something to be referred rather than the other way around. And then the flip side is obviously you don't want a TMO chipping in every time the ball goes out of play. On Munster's game specifically, Birch, like we kind of alluded to it there, that they played reasonably well. They put up, like, for a fairly depleted team against a stacked Leinster, they put up a pretty decent fight, and 28-7 is probably a little bit unfair of them. But what were the positives from their point of view, do you think?
The positives was they had a plan. They had a plan that wasn't just their generic game, that they obviously looked at Leinster and said, how can we hurt this defence? And you could see that in the first 20 minutes when they were a bit fresher, like those kicks down the middle, they were to stop Leinster kicking it off, and to kick back to Leinster, obviously, because when they find grass, Leinster's counter-attack opportunities are diminished because it's time, and then bounce into their counter-attack game, which is a strength of theirs, and they opened up a two-sided attack. They bounced down the blind side and just didn't really hurt Leinster. They got one opportunity where Robbie Henshaw gave away a penalty at a ruck and they kicked to the corner but didn't score. So, like, that's what they're at the end of the day, when they're setting up their attacking game, they're saying, how can we create red zone opportunities? And obviously there's two ways that you kick it in there from a penalty, or you run it in there. And because Leinster's defense is so good at the moment, they didn't really get many of those chances where they made line breaks and got in there on the front foot, but they did get opportunities to kick it in there. But unfortunately their line out really malfunctioned. I mean, there was an improvement initially when Codling went in, but I think we saw against Leinster that there's a lot of work to do there. Just they weren't secure or fluid on their own ball, really, and didn't really do any damage to Leinster's lineup. Leinster lineup looked, which has been poor, looked actually quite comfortable. I would kill for them, and then obviously they didn't have that pick game. Eventually they did with the try from Ahern. Probably 3 or 4 efforts that just didn't get any return out of as well. And that's it. Yeah, when you look at the players, match them up one by one. The Leinster back row were, well, particularly Doris and Van der Fleer were exceptional. Except Joe McCarthy, when Leinster needed him to make big carries, he did. And I thought at the end, that scrum, that really the worst scrum of the game for Munster on their own ball, where they folded on the non-dressing room side, around the 10-meter line. I think that was just showed the effort they put in, and just the drain it was in their energy of trying to stop Leinster or to try and break down Leinster. And then the Doris try, I mean, it looks really soft, but I think it's just it's the result of what's happened for the previous 70 minutes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I don't think we can judge Munster. And this is my article, my headline has caused a lot of debate. I do think there's a bigger divide. I do. Yeah. I think it's bigger than ever, and I hate to see that. That's not Leinster's fault, and it's not the other province's fault either. Effectively, they all have a share in it, but realistically, they all need support, because, like, before the game, I met a lot of Munster fans down there. Fellas have been abusing me for years, but like from the clubs, Clonwilliam and Canturk, and in fairness, they're good crack, but like the general message from them was like, what have we become? Like, why are we resting players against Leinster at home? You know what I mean? And then like the other thing was like, why are we resting players in Europe? Like, the two things that basically give us fuel are Europe and trying to beat Leinster. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying it's anyone's fault in this, but I think it's the wrong message. And then the wrong message that Jack Crowley doesn't play. and I don't want to pick out on him, and it's not his choice, but I think that's what there's a frustration amongst a lot of Munster fans, and even the Mac Hansen comments became anti-Leinster, that Leinster were getting everything from the freeze. But I did a bit of digging on this. I mean, Connacht feel like in particular and into pros that they don't get a fair crack at the whip. It wasn't against Leinster per se. And my headline wasn't that I think that Leinster have the divine right to be number one. It's just that's the way it's going at the moment.
Talking about resting players, Johnny, like we kind of said it to Ian Costello after the match that any regrets around, picking that game as the one to leave Crowley out. The reality is he starts up in Belfast, they get 5 points up in Belfast, they get 5 points across these two games. I think most people probably coming into this would have said if Munster got 5 points across away to Ulster and home against Leinster, it's probably like a level par outcome over those two games. They'll probably still feel justified in the way they selected it.
Yeah, and look, the reality is there's kind of constraints around Christmas time every single year in terms of who's available where, and that's made the coaching staff make those. Are they targeting that Ulster match to get what they can and then see what they can get out, trying to tag into the emotion of a Leinster full house in Thomond Park, maybe. But yeah, they probably are on par. If they had got 6 points, which, was potentially there for them at 14-7, maybe to get that, but they just ran out of puff. So yeah, look, the coaches have to make decisions that are going to try and get them, solidify them in that top 8, get them into the playoffs, get them into Europe, and they sit down and it's their prerogative to make those decisions. And they're also kind of a bit hamstrung with the amount of injuries and different things that they have too. So, but yeah, look, that's the coach's prerogative, and they decide those things, and they have to get whatever they can out of these two games.
Speaking of the injuries, actually, Johnny, and just someone who I actually thought acquitted himself fairly well on a tough night when Leinster were putting him under a lot of pressure, Ethan Coughlin. Put in a pretty good shift in probably one of the biggest games he's got to play, one of the biggest starts he's got for Munster in his short career. Like, he's someone I presume you would have come across him with Naas against Shannon a couple of years ago in 1B. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah. He played it. He was involved in the team that got promoted. And look, with their nines out, there's going to be opportunity for him and Patterson over the course. But yeah, it's great to see someone from the AIL, and obviously someone from such a big club as Shannon stepping up to the mark. And it's a great experience for him. And I thought he did well too. It's they need to kind of develop that behind the two lads, and taking those opportunities is a good thing. But he's been someone that has kind of led from the front with that Shannon side when they got promoted, and also over the last number of years when they've been in 1A. So it's great, and there's been numerous cases of this, particularly from in Munster's perspective, in terms of guys that 22, 23, they weren't in the academy system, or they've been released and they've been brought back in. And it's great to see it. It's kind of what the AIL is all about. So it shows that there's plenty of talent in that AIL squad, in those AIL squads that are there to be used across the board.
Yeah, he was one of those lads as well that made his debut in that famous game over in Wasps a few years ago. But yeah, good to see him kicking on a little bit more. Last point on Munster, Bertrand, it's more of a tangential point on Munster. Stuart Lancaster feels like he has taken himself out of the Munster running, if he was even in it, with his comments to a French outlet RMC in recent days. So for people who weren't aware, the rumour mill was in overdrive a couple of weeks ago when Andy Good on a podcast said that Lancaster, he had heard, either wanted out of Racing or Racing wanted to be rid of him. And Lancaster was asked about that the other day. He said, "I was disappointed by the lies told about me. One of them started in England about my departure from Munster, which is totally false. I lost all the respect I had for the people on the podcast who said that. I don't think he has applied for the Munster job."
No, he hasn't. He's determined to turn Racing around. He had a draw yesterday against Leon. It has been tough there. the results haven't been where he wants it. This is obviously his second season, but Stewart is a very committed guy, and it was, I think it was Andy Good started the rumor, and it got picked up in France, and it caused a bit of trouble for Stewart because it looked he wasn't committed, but he is 100% committed, and he's clarified that now. And I don't even think Munster are really looking, outside. I think they've Chris Boyd come in now, and they'll see how they go over the next few weeks. But the solution to Munster potentially is already in house with Prendergast, and a DOR. So it's rare for a coach to comment, but obviously he's getting it in the neck in France as well. So I suppose he wanted to clear it up.
Yeah, certainly under a lot of pressure. That is where we'll just about wrap it up very quickly. Couple of quick fire questions for you since it's the last pod of the year. Your rugby highlight of the last 12 months, Johnny. I might throw that one to you first.
A bit of an obscure one, the Olympic sevens final, Antoine Dupont. I just thought that was incredible for, it was not our sport, but a sport like rugby to be in front and center, and for him to do what he did, kind of from a worldwide perspective. I thought that was phenomenal to watch that. So a bit of a different one, but I thought that was unbelievable. Bert was probably over there for it at the time, but I just thought that was incredible.
Yeah, it was great. That's a great shout, actually. Bernard, yours?
It was actually the Champions Cup final in Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. I thought it was
Dupont again.
Yeah, well, he had a massive role in it, but I just thought it was an amazing game. Obviously disappointed an Irish team didn't win it, but drama, atmosphere, quality of rugby. For me, like, I left going all the games in a good place, So even though I admire this Toulouse team, I think they're phenomenal to watch, and I thought Leinster put it up to them as best they could, but just couldn't close the deal.
Yeah, two good shouts there. I think mine was the South Africa tour. It was my first time going over there in the summer. To be able to see a test at Loftus was brilliant, and capped off unbelievably by the comeback in Durban the following week. That's where I leave it. Johnny, before I go, actually, I'm going to be in Leicester this weekend. Give me some recommendations. Me and a couple of friends we're doing a Premiership weekend over there. Leicester, Exeter on Saturday, and then down to Northampton and Bath on Sunday. So give me some recommendations for Leicester on a Saturday evening.
Oh, it's been a long time since I've been there.
Are they all closed now, are they?
The other ones that I could say, I shouldn't say online. So I would say...
Text me afterwards.
I'll text you afterwards.
Or if anyone wants to leave a few comments in the YouTube, feel free.
Good trip. Enjoy that.
Yeah.
Birch, Johnny, thanks a million as always. We will see you in 2025, which is only next week. But until then, thanks for joining us, and we'll speak to you again soon.